Hello, everyone. My name is Raven. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Rainbow Veteran. It is starting to get warmer here in the Pittsburgh area, and I am so thankful for it as spring is around the corner, and I'm so happy about that. I'm so happy about warmth. I am over the cold months, honestly. But on today's episode, before I get too much of a side tangent on weather, uh, on today's episode, I want to talk about an issue that is plaguing the military over the last few years. And this is, of course, the recruitment and retention issue that is affecting most branches. And I say most because I believe last year, Marines and Army were the only two that had met their recruitment goals. And I can't say on the retention goals, but I do know, I remember seeing on the military.com email that I get updates for their newsletter that both those branches, I believe, hit the recruitment goals at least. And it's hitting on both sides of enlisted and officers. We're just not retaining and recruiting enough people. And what I'm going to say today is going to be a lot of how I understand everything. I'm not an analyst, but these are just educated guesses from being in the military, being a military brat, being on the subreddits and different parts of like Vet Talk and Vet Instagram, and just seeing and hearing people's issues and hearing and experiencing some of those issues myself. So I want to start with recruitment. And recruitment is a big one because a lot of the issues that people don't stay in the military are also some of the issues of why people don't enlist into the military. So what I'm going to be talking about kind of may repeat a little bit when I hit retention, but I do want to talk about a lot of these things because what is affecting the military is an issue with the military and the government is pretty much, those are the big things that are the cause of the issues, unfortunately. So when I'm talking about government, I'm not talking about this administration. I have been very critical of this current administration, the Trump administration, since the start of this podcast. I was going to start it with the tail end of Biden, but scheduling got a little issues with equipment and everything that I was getting. But I'm going to be critical of every presidency, every government office, because they aren't always the greatest. Biden wasn't great, Obama wasn't great, Trump wasn't great, but Trump's done a lot more damage, especially this current administration. So I don't want people to get it twisted. But this issue, I have seen seeds since Bush's. And I'm not talking about his dad. I'm talking about W here. George W. Bush's presidency. So a lot of the veterans from the global war on terror signed up because of 9/11 in the early 2000s. People like my mom. My mom signed up in either 2003 to 2005. I'm going to say ballpark 2004, but I don't really remember exactly the year. I remember I was still in elementary school. I do remember that. So I'm saying 2004 to be on the safe side. But when those service members went overseas, went to the Middle East, went to fight, we saw what was going on. A lot of us, like kids my age at the time, kids who were about to enlist, even kids younger than me, like early Gen Z, young millennials, we saw what was going on. We saw the news, the media coverage. We even saw some of the raw footage thanks to websites like LiveLeak back in the day. We saw the horrors of war and the actual unadulterated, unedited fighting. And it was horrible. And a lot of people realized that going through that was not worth it when the government didn't take care of its people. And I'm saying this as a government, not one party or the other, because has been and still is a lack of actual care for the people. And this is a both sides of the two parties' issues. I want to say, starting, Democrats have not been the greatest, especially with this current administration. A lot of Democrats and some people on the left, more liberals than leftists, what I've seen is everyone saying, fuck around and find out. You voted MAGA, fuck around and find out. You're losing your farm, sucks to suck. I don't think that's a great mentality to have. Honestly, I don't. Do I support people like that voted for Trump after everything that said and happened? No. Do I wish that they lose their farm, their kids go hungry, they struggle financially, could lose their home? Also no. I want to make sure that they are okay. Because they're Americans. They live in this country. I signed up to help defend them. I want to make sure that they are okay. I wouldn't trust them with anything. And I definitely wouldn't trust them to have my back. But I would still want to make sure that they are okay at the end of the day. And that's a thing I've been seeing a lot from Democrats is they aren't. And that's an issue because in red states, more often than not, they vote Republican because of the northern, quote-unquote northern, speaking to someone from Virginia, the northern Democrats don't give a shit about people's welfare in red states. They vote red and they don't care. They think that they're better than the people who live and work in the coal mines or in the farm. It's an issue I have seen. When I lived in Mississippi, when I lived in Virginia, it is an issue I've seen growing up. I just didn't realize it at the time. And I'm seeing it today still. We need to make sure, and this is a plea for Democrats, we need to make sure that those in red states who benefit the most from welfare programs don't lose their benefits, that don't lose their care, that they are being threatened to lose their care right now with this current administration. And if the government isn't going to continue to make sure that people are okay, why would anyone sign up to do that? A lot of our military is made from the poorest of poor people to try to escape that kind of struggle. But honestly, more often than not, they end up getting hurt and not being able to work. And that's a huge issue. With Republicans, we're also seeing them evolve from the party they used to be. There are diehard Ronald Reagan Republicans against Trump because Republicans have become, and I'm not saying as a whole, but especially the MAGA Republicans, have turned the party into a party of hate and the elite. They trade votes for oligarchy power. And I'm not saying Democrats aren't perfect with this either. Nancy Pelosi is a huge one that has like insider trading stuff. But Republicans are more guilty of this. And this goes back to like Reagan and Nixon too. Like it's just been getting worse. And that's the thing I don't think people really kind of understand is Republicans are kind of stepping away from making sure that the farmer and the coal miner are taken care of. And they still need to be taken care of because of these poor areas need to make sure that people are living. And these areas get a lot of federal funding. But if we cut that federal funding, they're going to struggle. I know in some places in West Virginia, people are waiting hours and hours for free clinics because they don't have insurance. They lost their Affordable Care Act, or they're threatened. The care is being threatened to be lost because it was labeled Obamacare strategically during Obama's administration, so Republicans later could cut that. And voters not realize that Obamacare and the ACA were the same thing. And they're struggling. And I want to make sure that they don't have to struggle and they still get their care. Another thing with the GWAT era I do want to talk about before I go into a too big of a side tangent is, especially in the Middle East, this was like a 20-year conflict that sadly kind of just resulted in nothing. 20 years of fighting for nothing. We left our allies. We pulled out thanks to Trump's first administration setting up a treaty, and the U.S. pulled out of the area. This created a power vacuum that made terrorist organizations kind of take over everything again. This left many veterans upset, as a lot of the work and loss that they had done and experienced felt like it was for nothing. Our allies in the area are now under constant threat from Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And this just got worse when Trump's first administration released prisoners who were terrorists. And we see that, and if you're recruiting age, we see that and basically like, well, what was the point? There's no point then. So why would you go and end up risking to lose your life just for that to happen? Another issue that's been hurting recruitment efforts over the years, honestly, is the biggest tool for recruitment. It's family legacies. You have these veterans who saw that saw that GWAT conflict and that power vacuum and all that waste of blood, sweat, and tears. And their kid wants to go into the military, and a lot of them are telling them, do something else. Do something else. Do not waste your time. And honestly, I'm part of that family legacy recruitment. I'm like a 6th generation military member. Like my great grandparents and their parents served in the military all the way down. On 3 sides of my family, my mom, my stepdad, and my father. But what I've seen in recent years is those veterans and the kids of those veterans either being military brats or being born after someone got out of the service, they're seeing the issues their parents went through, and they don't want to go through that themselves. I saw the struggle my dad went through trying to get his veteran claim for his back. It took him 10 plus years of fighting to get his back service connected. All because a piece of metal, when they were repairing the ship, fell off a cable and hit him and knocked him off the side of the ship. That was very well documented, and it still took him over 10 years to get his claim. And this isn't because the VA in itself is a failure. It is because the government has set up the VA to be a failure. And I want to talk about that real fast before I continue. The VA was set up for failure because we never, ever add enough staff to compensate new influxes of veterans coming into the VA system. When GWAT was happening and we had people getting hurt overseas and getting discharged for service-connected combat injuries like losing a leg or getting shot, so on and so forth, we never added more staff. So doctors were getting overwhelmed and the care was bottlenecking. And the exact same thing happened during the implementation of the PACT Act. And I'm not saying the PACT Act isn't good. The PACT Act is great. I'm very happy that the PACT Act went through and it's happening. But we added Vietnam era veterans who have finally gotten service connected. The 90s conflicts in the Middle East, like Operation Enduring Freedom and, Desert Storm, finally getting service connected. Burn pits, toxic exposure service connections. That's a huge influx going across two eras of conflict. One being 20 years long, and we did not add more staff. When I was trying to help with that, when I was trying to work for the VA, even at that point, there was a hiring freeze. And this was before midterms were going on for the presidency. There was a hiring freeze. There should not have been, but budget. And that's the thing, it's the budget. Because Congress never gives enough for the VA to have money to hire more staff, especially with something like the PACT Act. And that's a huge issue. And now, hiring freeze, budget cuts, layoffs is making it even worse for veterans. So if kids are seeing this, and they're seeing this from family members who have gone through this, that puts a bad taste in their mouth. And they're like, military's not for me. And the government wonders why we have a recruitment issue. Kids of vets are seeing this. And they're seeing how detrimental it is to try to get care for something that sometimes is even way more expensive getting it done through the private sector. That the government has signed a contract to make sure that we are taken care of, because these are service-connected issues. It is a huge deterrent that those kids seeing their family go through this, and they're like, no, I'm not going to go through that myself. I'm going to pick a different route. It's like the kids that grew up in the areas of the coal mines. A lot of them leave because they don't want to get stuck in a dead-end job. They know the health issues related to coal mine workers, and they know it's going to destroy their body and pretty much age their body way sooner than other people. They can make more money going off somewhere else. And for those who were raised as military brats, they see firsthand how people are treated in the military. And that could be a big deterrent, especially over the last few years. High levels of assault going on, favoritism, constant moving, poor housing facilities on base, high levels of divorce rates for military parents, and just how stateside family communities on bases and off can be super toxic, mostly because of the parents. The military edit out that last part. The military brats nowadays who see this think they should just leave that kind of life behind them, as they would not want that for the families they're trying to start. And speaking of assault, women are very hesitant to enlist. And I do want to note, last year there was a huge influx of women enlisting in the military. And that was a huge reason why the Army got their recruitment goal, was because of women signing up. But as a whole, women are very hesitant to enlist because of the high levels of assault statistics that there are in the military by either fellow enlisted members or officers. And this is a huge issue because it's roughly 40-something% of military women have reported being assaulted during their time in service. And that's just reported numbers. That's not including any woman who hasn't reported. Any woman who's scared of reporting, these are just 40% of women reporting that they've been assaulted, either as veterans down the road or during their time in service. Women see these statistics and they question if they should serve at all, especially with the high chance of them getting assaulted. The LGBTQIA plus community also is hesitant to serve, especially with Trump's administration trying to push out transgender service members out of the military. The entirety of the community knows that it is a slippery slope to remove more. It is something we're seeing slowly happen today with the whole quote-unquote DEI bullcrap. They're removing signs and history talking about LGBT service members. They're removing all the tools to help with reporting discrimination or bigotry for LGBTQI plus service members. It's something we're seeing also on the veteran side. LGBT veterans are having their care removed, signs pointing out something similar to don't ask, don't tell, returning is very likely. Because we're seeing all of those issues returning and repeating. On top of that, states are trying to remove the right to marriage. There's 9 states that are trying to remove LGBT people's rights to marry each other. There's an increase of religious ideology being used in both the state and federal legislation. And I'm reminding listeners that these things are unconstitutional, but it seems like the Trump administration just doesn't give a fuck about that. And our community, the LGBT community, sees that and goes, why should I fucking serve? Why should I lay down my life for a country that is turning its back on me and actively trying to make my life harder and remove my rights? Pay is also another big issue, and this is something I actually had to look up and double check because of the pay rate increase that went through last year. A junior enlisted will stay roughly around E3 that hasn't served 2 years yet is making less than $30,000 a year, which if you're single is not the worst thing, but if you're joining to take care of your family, that could be a little rough. Now, I do understand you do get basic housing allowance. You get a food allowance. You get clothing allowances. But also on the flip side, I also know that your boots are $200. Your uniform, especially if they're doing like what Army just did and changed the dress uniform, that's a few $1,000s you gotta throw out of your own pocket. That could be kind of hard, even with a clothing allowance. You have to eat on base for lunch. Yeah, your food allowance takes care of that. But if you're also trying to help your family, that doesn't go very far either. And especially when the Army just got caught, not using that food allowance money for fucking food. But that's a retention issue there. I should probably stop before I get too ahead of myself. Going back to pay for recruitment, and this also doubles for retention as well, the national average of a salary across the board between high-paying jobs like a lawyer or a doctor and a low minimum wage job, the national average salary is $60,000 a year, roughly. Me working at a gas station, and I'll do the math here with y'all. Let me pull up my calculator app on my phone. At a gas station, I can work as a supervisor, not a manager, just a supervisor. So you have entry level and a supervisor. I can make $18 an hour working nights. I work 40 hours a week. This is all before taxes. I work 4 weeks. So that's about $2,900, a little under, for a week. Or I'm sorry, that's for a month. Let me do this over again. 18 times 40, so that's a week. So yeah, a little under $2,900 a month. For a fucking year, I can work at a gas station and make just under $35,000 a year. At a gas station. Not having to worry about combat, not having to worry about all the other things. I can make $35,000 a year at a fucking gas station, ringing out people and making food. That's rough, because an E3 roughly makes $15.63 an hour. And yeah, that's still above the poverty line. It's still way better than, freaking $7.25 for the minimum wage. But places like Walmart have rates paying just a smidge more than an E3 would make. And you don't have to enlist, and you don't have to work in a stressful environment. And it also depends on your job in the military too, right? Like in the Navy, you have your rate, Army, Marines, it's MOS. Air Force has its own weird thing, and I have no fucking clue what Coast Guard and Space Force does. I think Coast Guard's very similar to the rate system, if I recall, but I don't know what they call it. We called it NEC in the Navy. Anyway, I'm getting too off track. Think about it this way. If you join the military and you become an underwater welder, you could be making $30,000 a year as an E3. You might get a fast track to promotion, because I don't know a lot of underwater welders in the military. But you doing the same thing in the Navy, let's say, you can get paid way more as a civilian. Underwater welders in a civilian world, last I knew, and this was a few years ago, I was talking to my dad about this, can make let's say $30 an hour. You work 40 hours. You usually probably work more than that, but let's just say that. For a whole year, that's over $60,000 doing the same job. So you have to love what you're doing. You have to love the military to continue that. And that plays into retention, because say you get out, say you serve all 4 years, you don't re-enlist because your job in the Navy as an underwater welder would pay you way, way, way more in the civilian world. You have all the clearances, you have the experience. Why do it for the Navy? You can do it in the civilian world and have a way better income. And that's a side tangent, or edit out that side tangent part. And that is a good segue for me to talk about retention issues. So what are causing them? What's causing the retention? I already talked about pay, and I could continue on about pay, but what really breaks it down is there's four primary topics, four themes, I will say, that are kind of the biggest reasons why people don't stay in the military. And they have a lot of overlap. These things I have noticed, and I've seen online in general, but I want to give a shout out to Army Air Force Brat. It's spelled Army Air number 4 CE Brat on TikTok, who did a poll to see why veterans would not suggest people thinking about the military, reasons why they would suggest not to do it. And I feel like these are really, really crucial information that shows why there's a retention issue. And the top 4 was toxic leadership, current administration, impact on health, and institutional betrayal. Some of these overlap with each other. and they're tied together. So I do want to talk about them. And I want to start with toxic leadership. Now, toxic leadership happens everywhere. And sadly, the military isn't an exemption to this. Unfortunately, and we've seen, there's a guy on TikTok talking about that, about how he's like a 40-year-old E4 being treated unprofessionally, I will say, trying to find the words he said, but being treated unprofessionally and disrespectfully by higher enlisted and officers, even though they're younger than him. So it just shows that, like, the military is kind of the example of toxic leadership at times. And I know this isn't every leader. This isn't every high-ranking person. Not all of them are bad. But there are some who are genuinely really bad leaders. And I do want to put a little note here is, more often than not, the loudest voices yelling about toxic leadership are the shitbags. The ones that you know are just one Article 15 away from getting kicked out of the fucking military. The ones who show up late all the time, that don't do their fucking job, they're the ones that usually yell about toxic leadership. The ones who kind of know it and see it, but don't really talk about it, or they try talking about it and reporting it to someone up higher in the command and nothing happened, they're the ones that just say, I'm just going to wait till my next duty station. I'm just going to wait till I'm not here. I'm just going to, lace up my boots, stiff upper lip, and keep going because I don't have to stay here forever, right? They're the ones that, as veterans, will talk about it to people they care about and their negative experiences. So, for those legitimate toxic leaders, we know those kinds of people. For the civilians who don't have any connection to the military, but have seen movies and TV shows, I want you to picture David Schwimmer's character in Band of Brothers. The captain he plays, right? I think it's Captain Sobel is how you pronounce his name. Especially in the scene where he makes Easy Company go on that night march and not let any of them hydrate. Then when there was one guy who did, he had to do it all over again and make sure he doesn't drink out of his canteen. That is toxic leadership. And you may be telling yourself, well, there's no way that this is happening in today's military. Fucking wrong. I have had stories told to me by Army veterans, Marine veterans, even some of the Marines I talked to while I was in service. They have had NCOs, warrant officers, regular officers that are fucking like this. And more often than not, they are the NCOs, especially for the Marines. Now, there are also leaders, this is a Marine thing I've noticed a lot too, there are leaders that are super extra hard asses on rules and regulations. And I'm not being a shitbag here. I want to state that, no, don't ignore the rules as they're written. Follow the rules, follow the regulations, do what you're supposed to. And I understand that some bases put a little extra rules on them. Like, taking an example from someone on TikTok, I can't remember his username, but he was talking about, he has this whole thing, it was like Navy story time. I think it's Cynical, I think is his name, about how he didn't have to wear the PT safety belt because the Navy's PT uniform already has reflectors inside the uniform. It's on the side of our sweats, it's on the side of our PT shorts, it's on the back of the shirt, in front of the shirt. But because it was a joint base, that was technically what the rules was supposed to be. So they made a memo changing and saying all personnel are supposed to wear PT safety belts in this manner, regardless of branch, right? Understandable still. Like, If you're not going to wear the Navy PT uniform, wear a PT safety belt. Especially when you're doing runs early in the morning, late at night. I get that. I totally get those kind of situations and those rules. But when you're being a fucking hard ass and making certain things that are so fucking small and minuscule an issue, that affects fucking morale, and it affects people's willingness to stay in the military. One example I've seen is Marines and their haircuts. Even when a haircut is in fucking regulations for the Marines, some NCOs or senior enlisted will have basically you have to do it this way and get that stereotypical super high faded Marine chop haircut. And if you don't do that, they're going to yell at you and make you PT, and they're just going to make your life hell because you don't have that stereotypical Marine haircut. And you have to make sure you get a haircut every fucking day. And you can't cut your own fucking hair. You have to go to the PX. Which, I don't know, the Marines have an exchange too. It's the Marine exchange, but I grew up Navy Army areas. But still, you have to go to the barbershop on base and you have to get the haircut. So you're going to basically, spend $12 every fucking day making sure your haircut is like, it's worse than a hoa. It's literally like hoas with grass. That's Marines with the haircuts. And people don't want to fucking deal with that. It's fucking ridiculous. Another thing that fucks with morale and is a reason why people don't re-enlist is leave being held hostage. Again, for you civilians who don't really know much about the military personally, think of Band of Brothers. We've seen the captain do that. Little minuscule things, leave denied. Little things, right? Like, oh, hey, your shirt is like 2 millimeters to the right, too far in your footlocker. Leave denied, right? Stuff like that still happens in the military. And I get it. If you're in a combat zone or the mission dictates you can't really leave because of the mission, I get that. I get the mission affecting leave. But denying it for the most petty shit is fucking horrible and stupid. I'll give an example. I'm going to make up an example right here, right now. So I grew up near Fort Eustis in Virginia, right? So say you live and you're stationed on Fort Eustis. You're working and your job is an aviation mechanic. You're fixing a helicopter, right? Say that's your job. There's a bunch of others working on aviation, working on helicopters. You put in for leave. Your leave gets approved. Edit out that cough. Your leave gets approved. And all of a sudden, you step on the grass. You step on the first sergeant's fucking grass. How dare? Because you tripped. You tripped, fell, caught yourself, right? I haven't seen this, but I've heard this growing up in the area, that someone's dad lost his leave because of that. So they couldn't go on family vacation. His dad had to stay behind while they went somewhere else. That's the shit that is so fucking stupid. I've seen leave be denied because someone went to medical. And I've heard this from a veteran at the VA hospital. We were sitting, waiting for the same doctor, or at least the same care. We're waiting to get stuff looked at, and we were just shooting the shit. And he said he got his leave denied once because he went to medical. And he doesn't fucking regret it. Because when he went to medical, he's lucky that he did because that got the ball rolling for eventually what got him service connected. And that is just so stupid. But that's tied to kind of the other thing I want to talk about, institutional betrayal. Because that ties directly into the toxic mentality of don't go to fucking medical. Never go to medical. Oh, what's wrong? You're hurt? Suck it the fuck up, change your socks, drink some water, and have a Motrin. Don't go to fucking medical. And this is a mentality that's been passed down across generations from high leadership positions like the older enlisted who've been, lifers, spent 20 years in the Army, 20 years in the Navy, so on and so forth. Edit out that cough. But they take that mentality and they instill it in the junior service members that you shouldn't go to medical, that going to medical is a bad thing, and if you go to medical, it is a sign that you are weak and should not be in the military. And this fucking happened to me when my ankle issues first started up. I was PTing, and I dropped to my knees from just the sheer pain. I think we were doing jumping jacks, and I just landed on my foot. I like the whole jump up, clap your hands, your legs are spread. I went straight to the ground out of sheer fucking pain. And it wasn't until someone else told me to go to medical that I went. Because I had the mentality I shouldn't go to medical because I don't want to be seen as weak. But because of this, a lot of people don't go to fucking medical, and when they have injuries like mine, they end up not getting it service connected, or it takes them years and years longer to get it service connected because there's no fucking evidence of the injury in the military. And that's a mentality not to have. It's getting better, sure. I can't say it is better at this current point, but it was getting better from my friends who are still in telling me. But most of my friends are now vets. So, what's the mentality now? I don't know. As of 2 years ago, it was getting better. And I thank veterans for pushing for that. But that's the thing, is that's an institutional betrayal. We shouldn't go to medical because even your fellow service members, some of the ones that are the same fucking rank as you, will dogpile on you and say you're weak and you should just go home because you went to fucking medical. And that's an annoying thing to have to deal with. So fucking annoying. And it fucks with people's morale. Another thing with institutional betrayal, like I said with the recruitment part, is the assaults. And this, I'm going to go a little more in detail about how it's taken care of in the military, more often than not. Regardless of someone's gender or sexual orientation, people get assaulted both physically and sexually in the military. And reporting these things, like I said, reporting is an issue. People have reported the issues to their supervisors, to their chain of command about the assault, and the system fails them. Sometimes it just gets pushed to the wayside. The assaulter doesn't get actually reprimanded. There's not enough quote-unquote evidence to justify court-martialing the assaulter. And sometimes it's the supervisors that are doing the assault. I've heard stories of NCOs and officers assaulting junior enlisteds. And that's fucking horrible. And sometimes if you report it to a higher up, they don't even fucking believe you. Is that getting better? I sure fucking hope so. But I'm not holding my breath. Because a lot of the times when someone reports it, or the person who had been assaulted, like me, you're left with trauma. MST is a huge thing. It is a huge thing for people. Being sexually assaulted in the military is huge. There is an entire category of PTSD care specifically for military sexual trauma from those events. And I don't know if it's getting better or not. And sadly, a lot of the times, the person who did the assault ends up staying in the military longer than the person assaulted. And that's fucking unsad as hell. That is fucking bullshit. People will not re-enlist when they see nothing happens to the person who did the assaulting. And sometimes they have to deal with them, even if there is things going on, they have to deal with them being in the same area. A lot of times, they get away scot-free, unfortunately. Or they get reprimanded, lose a rank, and lose, duty, or, leave. And they're pretty much on, a probation thing. But they're still in the same fucking area. You still have to deal with them on base. So the person who got assaulted just says, fuck this, I'm not going to deal with this, it's too rough, and goes home. And speaking of home, housing is a fucking issue, especially on the bases. I kind of touched on this earlier. And this is an issue not because of the military, but because of us not dealing with the contractors. Yes, should we have contractors for construction jobs and everything? Sure, fine, whatever, that's fine. You don't have the Seabees working on everything in the Navy, for example. They could go out in combat and actually do what Seabees do. Like steal trains in Korean War. But the civilian contractors are getting away with fucking murder. Not literally, well, unless you're in Camp Lejeune and negligence, those housing situations, maybe. But, they are literally getting away with everything, right? How's, maintenance requests going on months on end ignored? They're getting millions of dollars. And most of the time, whenever the military finds out about this, and they're like, oh, you didn't do what you're supposed to do? Slap on the wrist. Bad. Don't do it again. And then they go right back to fucking doing it. The military needs to fix that issue. Famously, I think even civilians know about this who have no ties to the military. Camp fucking Lejeune for the Marines has had such a black mold problem in its barracks for decades. And it's not, oh, it's a discipline issue. No, it's a ventilation fucking issue. Camp Lejeune's barracks are so riddled, and the housing are so riddled with black mold, that the VA has a whole care system in place for those who had just served in that area, in Camp Lejeune, due to years of black mold exposure. Contractors are supposed to be fucking fixing these issues, and they are lacking in that. So there's one or two things that people who are in the military do. They don't re-enlist, or they marry that fucking stripper they met and had a good night with off base to get off base housing. That's pretty much what it's like, it seems like. And listen, I know not every base is like this. I know that not every branch has issues like this. Air Force. Fucking hotel at 4-star hotel ass having motherfuckers. But still, this should not be an issue, and we should be doing more with those contractors to stop having it be an issue. And speaking of black mold, let's talk about the impact of health the military has on people. But Rayven, it's the military. That should be a given. Yeah, sure, if you're you're going into a combat scenario, if you're signing up to be in the military, like say the Army, and you signed up to be fucking an infantryman, or 11 Bravo, and it's the middle of a fucking war, sure, you should probably expect getting hurt. But there's also a lot of gear that's made specifically to protect you. Funny how that works, right? But there are situations where you shouldn't get hurt. And I already talked about some in the episode, especially like my dad, right? He shouldn't have expected to get hurt, but he did. You shouldn't expect that your Osprey that you're on that's transporting you suddenly has a fucking system failure and you end up crashing on the side of a ship or crashing on land. You survive, but hey, surprise, thanks Boeing, you don't have legs anymore. You shouldn't expect that. You should expect your equipment to fucking work, or in ways that the system should make sure you aren't going to get hurt with shit like that, right? Right, I think so. But sometimes jobs are so bad that depending on what your job is, it is pretty much a guarantee that you can get VA compensation just for your job. And most ones I think that come to mind are paratroopers and artillerymen, because they will typically have back and knee problems, and you can go to the VA. It's like, hey, I have this knee issue. It's chronic. I am constantly in pain. What was your job? I was a paratrooper. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Dot scratch. Here you go. VA compensation. Is it that simple? No. But it's a lot easier than, say, people like me who had to deal with it even with medical documentation. Heck, the impact can be so bad that there is a joke with some truth in the military and for veterans that the military ages you 10, 20 fucking years. And I'm feeling that firsthand. I'm about to turn 30 at the end of this month, at the time of recording. And I have to use a cane because my ankle issues are so bad that it's causing my knee to get fucked up. Because my ankle has never been fixed, and now my knee is having issues. Sure, I'm going to physical therapy for both, but the pain is so hard and so bad, and I'm limping, that most of the time, even with physical therapy, I'm on a wait list for surgery, and guess what? I still limp. I'm 30 fucking years old. Almost. And yet, I feel like an old person walking through the VA with a cane. The American Legion post I was going to made fun of me because I had to use my cane after marching with them, because I was so fucking stubborn and proud that the first time I marched on a Memorial Day or Veterans Day, one of the two, I can't remember. It was Memorial Day. I was marching with my Legion post. I did not want to be seen as weak because I still have that fucking mentality. And I'm a vet. And as a stubbornness, I'm still trying to get over. But this issue can be something that causes people not to enlist into the military because the trade-off of your health getting impacted isn't worth the benefits. Or, here soon, the lack thereof. The impact on mental health is a huge thing. Even outside the stereotypical effects on mental health that the military and combat has, just being in the military can have a big impact. Not a lot of people understand there's little t trauma to basic. They literally break you down and mold you into the perfect soldier, sailor, marine, airman, whatever, right? Whatever Space Force fucking has. Guardsman, I think, same as Coast Guard. Anyway, that has little t trauma because it's fucking with your sense of identity. And then when you get out of the military, guess what? You have no identity now. There's grief with that, right? Because these formidable early adulthood years you have for most people, you're basically, okay, I'm a soldier, I'm a sailor, I'm a marine. This is who I am. When you get home, who the fuck are you? That's something I had to experience too. Being away from family also has an impact on you. You're missing informative years of your family growing up. You know, some people have a baby and join the military. You might miss her first words or their first words or his first words. You might miss them going to prom or, you know, graduating high school because you're overseas. That shit fucking sucks and impacts your mental health. And then when you come home, guess what? It's like you don't know your kid, or your kid acts like they never, you know, you run around. It doesn't happen all the time, but that is an impact, and it happens to people. And that's the thing not a lot of people realize. And that plays into the 22, I think it's actually 29 a day now. But that is one of the things that contributes into veterans, unfortunately, being their own express ticket out of this world. And I want to add one other factor into it is care. Veterans struggling with care, getting care, the chronic pain, losing their housing, becoming homeless with their families, and systematic failure by the fucking institution that's sworn to protect them when they got out of service. And this ties directly into this current fucking administration. This is not something that is unique to the Trump administration. I'll give it that. But what I feel like is unique to this current iteration of Trump's administration is the lack of genuine care and the increased backstabbing to veterans and military families. Layoffs to crucial parts of the VA and suicide hotlines. Hiring freezes for the VA. I already kind of talked about this. Trying to remove an estimated 15,000 personnel for no fucking valid reason other than hate. Funds being cut for the VA so they can't buy supplies for, hospitals. They can't buy more masks or gloves or refuel the transportation vans to pick up veterans who are wheelchair bound and living by themselves. Removal of all celebrations of diversity in our military, which was never a bad thing, because different backgrounds have different life experiences, and that creates a better system for the mission, because you have a different pair of eyes looking at the same situation, coming at it at a different angle. Think of it like a pincer maneuver. You come towards a great goal together, but having that different experiences helps change things. And this the removal of diversity in our military, led to removal of important history being taught in different branches military, like the Tuskegee Airmen. And it wasn't until people made a huge stink about that the Air Force brought that back into BMT. And thanks to Pete Hegseth, we're renaming a lot of bases unnecessarily. And look, I understand renaming Fort Liberty to Fort Bragg. Liberty didn't make sense. We should have named it after another service member, sure. So he decided to name it after Fort Bragg, but a different Bragg. It's not the Confederate traitor Bragg, right? I get that. But now they're looking to rename Fort Moore, which was named after a couple who did so much for the military personnel and their fucking families, back to Fort Benning. And that is such a waste of time and resources. Sure, is the new person with the same last name, Benning, really cool and, deserves something? Sure, maybe. Arguably, fucking Moore did a lot more. And I'm half expected for them to find an excuse to turn Fort Greg Adams back to Lee. And that is such a stupid waste of time and resources. And it's ridiculous. It really is ridiculous, and I don't understand it when we could be doing so much fucking more for the military. If you want to change Fort Liberty, fine, fucking go ahead. It's kind of a dumb name, I'll give you that. But Fort Moore was fine, right? And we're wasting all this time when we can actually be, putting shit back into housing. Maybe figuring out why veterans are struggling years after the military, probably because of all the shit they had to deal with in the military. And I'm going to hit my conclusion now here, because I feel like we're at a good point here. And I'm just going to go on a rant. The military has had retention issues since the tail end of the global war on terror. And these issues are slowly getting better, or were, thanks to the focuses by the Marines and Army near the tail end of Biden's administration. But the second round of Trump has made all those improvements go right fucking back down. We are slowly taking away better care for our veterans, even with some snags with the PACT Act. But there are these edit out that last part. But these first couple of months of the Trump administration is undoing all of that good work that has happened from the early to mid to 2010s to 2022 with all those laws surpassing and increasing care for veterans. It is a shame. It is unsad as hell, and I'm very disappointed with Republicans right now, and Democrats, because they're just letting this shit happen. As always, everyone, I just want to remind you all to stay safe, stay hydrated, and stay vigilant. I'll see you all in the next episode. Hey everybody, it's Rayven here. Before we hit the outro song, I do want to make this little off the top of my head ad here for Trans Hope United. Trans Hope United is a trans-focused podcast group that I joined and helped formed with other podcasters to talk about and share our stories with each other and our audiences. Groups that we have right now is the Brat podcast, or Ben and Robin are trans, Valentine's Voice, podcast, and just other podcasts that we're slowly getting into the fold here to try and spread awareness about each other's shows and just kind of show that, hey, the transgender community, even with everything going on, is standing together and standing firm, that no matter what happens, we are here. And so I do want to make this, and I'm going to add this until we get a official ad that we're in hopes of working on to talk about. But I am going to add these at the tail end of every episode to kind of talk about it and just have you guys listen. So I will try to remember to add them to the show notes in every episode. But if you just look up Trans Hope United and look at all the podcasts under that user name in different spots on like Spotify or any podcast website, you'll kind of see them there, especially on Spotify. So definitely go check them out. And I'll see you all later.